You manipulated him. You whispered poison in his ear, twisted his mind until he signed everything over to you.
Hey everyone, it's Evie, and today I need to tell you a story. It's not an easy one to tell, but it's mine. It's about how a legacy is earned, not inherited. It begins in a room that smelled of old paper and greed. The conference room at the law office was all polished mahogany, designed to make you feel small. Across the long table sat my family, my Aunt Cynthia, her face a tight mask of anticipation, my Uncle Dennis, his knuckles white as he gripped the chair, and my cousin Brendan, who wore a smirk like he was already spending the money. They were buzzing with an energy I knew all too well, the thrill of entitlement. And then there was me, silent, waiting. The lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Davies, cleared his throat and turned on a large monitor. And suddenly, there he was. My grandfather, Walter. His face was weathered and thin on the screen, but his eyes were as sharp and clear as I'd ever seen them. His voice, steady and calm, filled the suffocating silence. "If you're watching this," he began, "you're likely waiting for your share. But let me be clear. In this world, there are builders and there are wreckers. My entire estate, including 100% of Veridian Homes and all architectural patents, I leave to the one who chose to build with me, to my granddaughter, Evelyn." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Brendan shot up from his chair. "No! This is a joke!" he yelled. But to understand how we got there, how that moment came to be, we have to go back 7 years. And if you've ever felt like the underdog in your own family's story, maybe take a second right now to hit that like button, because you're going to want to see how this ends. It all started in a sterile, white-walled room of a Pittsburgh hospital. 7 years ago. St. Jude's Mercy Hospital, downtown Pittsburgh. The rain was streaking down the windowpane, blurring the city lights into a watercolor wash. Inside, the only sounds were the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the quiet hiss of the ventilator. My grandfather, Walter, looked so small in that bed, lost in a tangle of wires and tubes. He was unconscious, a shadow of the vibrant man I knew. I thought we were there to pray for a miracle. I was wrong. My family was there for a meeting. The doctor, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, laid out the facts. A massive stroke. The damage was severe. His chances of a meaningful recovery were less than 10%, while the cost of long-term care would be astronomical, easily draining his life savings within a year. My Uncle Dennis, never one for sentiment, leaned forward. "So what you're saying, Doc," he began, his voice devoid of emotion, "is that we're looking at a long, expensive road to nowhere. We should discuss a DNR. A do not resuscitate order." The words hit me like a physical blow. My Aunt Cynthia chimed in, placing a hand on the doctor's arm. "It's a mercy, really," she said, her voice smooth as venom. "Walter wouldn't want to be a burden." A burden? He was their father. He had built the house they grew up in with his own 2 hands. I shot out of my chair. "He's a fighter!" I choked out, my voice trembling. "You can't just give up on him!" Dennis scoffed. "Evelyn, this isn't a movie. It's reality. It's money." That's when I knew I was utterly alone in that room. I want you to type a 1 in the comments if you would have stayed and fought, or a 2 if the pressure would have been too much. Be honest. In that moment, I felt the weight of the entire world on my shoulders, and I had to make a choice. My family left that night. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway, a sound of finality, of abandonment. They didn't just walk out of the hospital, they walked out of his life, and mine. I was 20 years old, standing in the harsh fluorescent light of a hospital corridor, feeling the world tilt on its axis. But I stayed. That night, I became his sole advocate, his guardian, his only family. I argued with the administrators, I pleaded with the doctors, and I signed every form they pushed in front of me, each signature feeling like I was signing away a piece of my own future. The financial responsibility documents were a mountain of paper, a legal testament to a debt that would follow me for years. The true cost, however, wasn't measured in dollars. A week later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my small apartment. It was from Carnegie Mellon University, right here in Pittsburgh. Inside was an acceptance letter for their prestigious School of Architecture, along with the offer of the Walter Gropius Scholarship, a full ride. It was everything I had ever worked for. It was the dream my grandfather and I had talked about for countless hours over his drafting table. It was my entire future, printed in elegant font on expensive paper. I sat on my bed, the letter in one hand and a hospital bill in the other. One represented the life I was supposed to have, the other represented the life I had to choose. I thought of my grandfather's hand guiding mine as he taught me to draw a perfect arch. I thought of his voice telling me, "Evie, a structure is only as strong as its foundation." In that moment, I knew what my foundation had to be. With tears blurring my vision, I tore the letter in half. I chose him. The next few months were a blur of exhaustion and antiseptic smells. I worked double shifts as a waitress downtown, the scent of coffee and grease clinging to me. Then, I'd take the bus back to the hospital and spend the night in that uncomfortable armchair, reading to him and talking to him, just to fill the silence. The doctors were grim, calling his state a persistent vegetative plateau. They used phrases like manage expectations, but I refused. I saw a flicker in his eyes that they didn't. Then one day it happened. He squeezed my hand. A week later, he could follow me with his eyes. But the stroke had ravaged the part of his brain that controlled speech. The frustration was a physical presence in the room, a brilliant mind trapped behind a wall of silence. He was there, but he couldn't get out. Desperate to connect, I brought his old leather-bound sketchbook and a charcoal pencil to the hospital. I placed the pencil in his trembling right hand and laid the open book on his lap. For a long time, nothing. Then, with an effort that made his whole body shake, he began to draw. It wasn't a word. It was a line, a perfect load-bearing arch. He looked at me, his eyes wide. He was speaking, not with his voice, but with his soul. From that day on, the sketchbook was our language. He couldn't ask for water, but he could design a brilliant rainwater reclamation system. He couldn't comment on the weather, but he could sketch a home with perfect passive solar orientation. He was pouring his forgotten genius onto the page. A lifetime of ideas I thought were lost forever. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's a skill you have that's so deep in your bones you could communicate with it even if you lost your voice? For him, it was building. Tell me yours in the comments below. I'd genuinely love to read them. I knew then this wasn't just a recovery, it was a resurrection, and I had to do something. Holding the sketchbook, which was now filled with dozens of new, brilliant designs, I felt a surge of naive hope. This was proof. This wasn't just a man clinging to life. This was a mind, a brilliant mind, roaring back. They had to see this. If they could just see what I saw, I thought, their hearts would melt. They would come back. My hands trembled as I dialed my Aunt Cynthia's number from the quiet hospital hallway. The sketchbook was tucked under my arm like a sacred text. When she answered, her voice was clipped, impatient. "What is it, Evelyn?" I couldn't contain the excitement in my voice. "Aunt Cynthia, it's about Grandpa. He's communicating. He's designing again. He has these new ideas for affordable housing using sustainable materials. It's incredible. He's still here." The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then, her voice came back, as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "Don't be naive, Evelyn," she said flatly. "A dead branch can still sprout a single leaf before it rots completely." I was speechless. The sketchbook suddenly felt heavy, worthless. "He is still a financial black hole," she continued, her voice hardening. "We told you our position. Don't call us again with this hopeful news. You can call us when his lawyer calls you. That's the only news we're interested in hearing." Click. The line went dead. I slid down the wall, clutching the phone, the coldness of her words seeping into my bones. It was a new kind of pain. This wasn't just abandonment born from fear or pragmatism. This was a calculated, ghoulish waiting game. They weren't just waiting for him to die. They were waiting to get paid. In that moment, something inside me broke, and something harder, stronger, began to form in its place. This was no longer just about saving him. It was about protecting his legacy from the vultures who were circling it. After my aunt's phone call, the hospital felt less like a place of healing and more like a cage. 6 months after his stroke, Walter was stable enough to be discharged. We moved into a tiny, second-floor walk-up apartment in Pittsburgh's Bloomfield neighborhood. The paint was peeling, the radiator hissed like a cornered snake, but it was ours. It was our sanctuary. For the first time in months, we were home. My life became a carefully balanced act of survival. By day, I was a ghost moving through the city. I'd sling hash at a diner during the breakfast rush, then clean office buildings late into the night, the smell of bleach becoming my permanent perfume. The medical debt was a giant, suffocating blanket I could never quite throw off. I was perpetually exhausted, running on cheap coffee and sheer will. But at night, after I'd helped Walter settle, my real work began. At a rickety desk with a second-hand laptop I'd bought for $50, I started the painstaking process of digitizing his sketches. Using free architectural software and watching hours of online tutorials, I translated his shaky, hand-drawn lines into clean, precise digital blueprints. And as I did, I began to see. I wasn't just copying drawings. I was rediscovering a lost language. I saw the genius in the way he designed a load-bearing wall to also serve as a thermal mass, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it at night. I saw how his modular construction plans could build a sturdy, beautiful home for a fraction of the typical cost. The world had dismissed him as a relic, a man whose time had passed. But looking at these blueprints on my glowing screen, I realized his ideas weren't from the past. They were for the future. I wasn't just his granddaughter anymore. I was becoming his apprentice, and I knew I couldn't let these designs die on a hard drive. An idea on a laptop screen is one thing. A home you can stand in is another. I knew I needed help. I needed capital. And one rainy Tuesday, I saw a sign. Tacked to a corkboard in a local coffee shop was a flyer for the Pittsburgh Renewal Project, a citywide startup competition seeking innovative ideas to revitalize the community. The grand prize was $25,000 in seed funding and a spot in a business incubator program. It felt like destiny. For the next month, I barely slept. I devoured books on business plans. I learned about market analysis. I practiced my pitch in front of our bathroom mirror until 3 a.m. I chose one of Walter's most elegant designs, a 900-square-foot modular home that was both beautiful and incredibly energy efficient. I named the theoretical company Veridian Homes for the green, vibrant future I hoped it would build. The day of the competition, I felt like a complete imposter. The event was held in a sleek downtown skyscraper, filled with confident MBA types in sharp suits, all talking about scalability and profit margins. And then there was me, a waitress in a blazer I bought at a thrift store, armed only with my grandfather's drawings and a desperate hope. When they called my name, my heart hammered against my ribs. I spoke about dignity. I spoke about how good design wasn't a luxury for the rich, but a fundamental right for everyone. I told them about Walter's vision of creating communities, not just houses. I finished, my voice shaking, and the room was quiet. I thought I had failed. Then the head judge stood up. "In a room full of business plans," he said, his voice booming. "You were the one who gave us a soul." And then he announced the winner, Veridian Homes. My eyes found my grandfather, who I'd brought with me, sitting in his wheelchair at the back of the room. He couldn't speak. He couldn't clap. But a single, proud tear was rolling down his cheek. That moment changed everything for me. Have you ever taken a huge leap of faith that paid off? It doesn't matter how big or small. If you have, I want you to share that feeling by just typing the word yes in the comments. Let's celebrate those wins together. That check wasn't just money, it was belief. It was a beginning. The next 5 years were a whirlwind of hard work and quiet joy. With the seed money, we built our first prototype. Then, we partnered with a local nonprofit to build our first real home for a family who had lost everything in a fire. Walter was there for every step. I'd wheel him out to the construction sites, and he'd sit for hours, watching, observing. He couldn't speak, but a single sharp nod from him told the framing crew everything they needed to know. He was my mentor, my anchor, my entire heart. We weren't just building homes. We were rebuilding his spirit, and in turn, he was building mine. He passed away on a Tuesday morning in early spring. It wasn't in a cold hospital room, but in his favorite armchair by the window of our apartment, the one that overlooked the city skyline. He was holding a pencil, a half-finished sketch of a community garden resting in his lap. He died, as he had lived for those last few years, peacefully, with dignity, and in the middle of creating something beautiful. The loss was a hollow ache in my chest, but it was edged with a profound gratitude for the 7 extra years we were given. The funeral was small and intimate, just as he would have wanted. Neighbors, a few friends, the family from our first Veridian home. It was a gathering of people whose lives he had genuinely touched. As the service concluded and I stood talking with a handful of mourners, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Cynthia, Dennis, and Brendan, all dressed in designer black that looked more appropriate for a hostile takeover than a funeral. They scanned the modest crowd with undisguised disdain. Brendan swaggered over to me, ignoring the solemnity of the occasion. Heard you're running some little construction company now, Evie, he sneered, not even bothering to offer condolences. Cute. After we inherit his land and assets, maybe we'll hire you to bulldoze that dusty old workshop for us. The battle was about to begin. The reading of the will wasn't an ending. It was a declaration of war. After my family stormed out of the lawyer's office, their faces masks of pure fury, I knew they wouldn't go quietly. A direct legal challenge was risky and expensive, so they chose a different weapon: poison. It started a week later. Anonymous posts began appearing on local Pittsburgh community forums and real estate blogs. The user names were generic, but the venom was specific. Heard from an inside source that Veridian Homes uses cheap, imported materials that won't pass inspection. Another one read, "Don't be fooled by the sob story. The founder is just an inexperienced girl who manipulated her dying grandfather." My cousin Brendan's fingerprints were all over it. The same arrogance, the same cruelty. He couldn't have the company, so he was going to burn it to the ground. The lies began to take their toll. A promising contract with a community developer was suddenly put on hold. A longtime supplier called, asking for assurances. The dream that Walter and I had built with calloused hands and hopeful hearts was being smeared by someone who had never built anything in his life. The foundation of trust I had worked so hard to create was being attacked, not with hammers, but with whispers. One night, sitting alone in my small office, scrolling through the cascade of lies, a wave of despair washed over me. It would be so easy to hide, to let the storm pass. But then I looked at a photo of Walter on my desk, his eyes full of quiet strength. Hiding was never his way. And it couldn't be mine. It's a terrible feeling, watching someone try to tear down something you love with lies. Right now, wherever you are watching this, I want you to think about how you'd react. Would you fight back publicly or work silently to prove them wrong? Let me know your choice in the comments, because my next move was the biggest gamble I'd ever taken. I wasn't just going to defend his legacy, I was going to immortalize it. My gamble wasn't a defensive press release or an angry social media post. It was bigger. I invited every major local news outlet, real estate blogger, and industry influencer in Pittsburgh to a press conference. But I didn't hold it in a sterile office. I held it on the front lawn of the very first Veridian home we ever built, the one that had given a family back their future. When I stepped up to the podium, I could see the skepticism in the reporters' eyes. In the back, I spotted Cynthia and Dennis, arms crossed, watching me with smug expressions, waiting for me to fail. I took a deep breath, and I didn't deny their lies. I told our truth. I told them about the hospital, the sketchbook, the long nights, and the dream of dignified housing. "You have heard rumors," I said, my voice clear and steady, "that this company's foundation is weak, that it was built on manipulation. You've heard that I am just an inexperienced girl." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. You're half right. I was an inexperienced girl, but I had the greatest teacher. On cue, a large screen behind me flickered to life. It wasn't a slideshow. It was the full, unedited video of Walter from the will reading. The reporters watched, mesmerized, as my grandfather laid out his final wishes. But then, a new section began to play. One Mr. Davies had held back for this very moment. Walter looked straight into the camera, his gaze piercing. "I know my children," he said, his voice laced with a sad certainty. "I know their capacity for greed. That is why, 5 years ago, I took legal steps. I transferred every single one of my architectural patents into an ironclad trust, with myself and my granddaughter Evelyn as the sole trustees. Veridian Homes isn't just her company. It is a legal fortress that I helped her build brick by brick to protect our vision from the wreckers. The game was over. It was checkmate. My aunt and Soskolan turned and fled, their faces pale with public humiliation. The whispers were silenced, not by my voice, but by his. Walter hadn't just left me a legacy, he had left me a shield. With the truth finally out, the cloud over Veridian Homes lifted. The company grew faster than I could have ever imagined. We went from building single houses to developing entire micro-communities, all based on Walter's principles of sustainability, beauty, and affordability. Seeing families move in at homes that he had dreamed of, seeing children play in yards that he had sketched, was a feeling deeper than success. It was fulfillment. The company was secure, the inheritance was vast, and for the first time since I was 20, I wasn't worried about money. But that led to a new question that kept me up at night. What is all this for? One evening, I found the old shoebox where I keep my most important documents. At the bottom, folded and fragile, were the two halves of that torn acceptance letter from Carnegie Mellon. I held the pieces in my hand, the dream I had sacrificed. And I realized the inheritance wasn't the company or the patents. The true inheritance was the power to rebuild what was broken, not just in buildings, but in lives. The following year, I used a substantial portion of the company's profits to launch the Walter Green Foundation for Future Architects. Its mission was simple and deeply personal: to provide full-ride scholarships to gifted, underprivileged students from Western Pennsylvania who dreamed of studying architecture. We were funding the exact scholarship I had to give up. At our first awards ceremony, held on the Carnegie Mellon campus, I stood on a stage I never thought I'd see again. I looked out at the recipient, a brilliant young woman from a steel town family, her eyes shining with disbelief and joy. As I handed her the oversized check, I leaned in and whispered, Walter's only rule was to build things that last. Go build a beautiful future. In her eyes, I didn't see my own lost dream. I saw it reborn, stronger and more meaningful than ever before. This was his true legacy. Not building houses, but building architects. So here I am, back where it all started, in my grandfather Walter's workshop. I've kept it just the way he left it. The smell of cedarwood and graphite still hangs in the air. Holding his favorite well-worn T-square, I've had a lot of time to think about what really happened, what the ultimate lesson was in all this pain and triumph. And it comes down to two very different words: valuation and value. My family was obsessed with valuation. They looked at my grandfather and ran a cold, cruel calculation. They saw his age, the astronomical hospital bills, and the slim chance of recovery, and they put a price tag on his life. To them, he was a bad investment, a liability on a balance sheet. Their love was conditional, based entirely on what they could get from him. They valuated his life and found it worthless. But I saw his value. I saw the immeasurable worth in his wisdom, in his stories, in the quiet dignity with which he faced his own mortality. The value was in the 7 extra years we got together, the mornings spent sketching, the feeling of his hand in mine. That kind of value can't be quantified in a bank account or a will. It's the bedrock of a meaningful life. We live in a world that constantly tries to give us a valuation, our job title, our salary, our follower count. It's easy to get lost in their numbers and forget our own worth. But you are not a stock to be traded. You are a life to be lived. It's late here now, getting close to 9 p.m., and maybe it is where you are, too. As this story ends, I want you to do one small thing. Look away from the screen and think of one person who saw your true value when others didn't. Hold on to that feeling. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in building a life of value over valuation, then hit that subscribe button and join this community. Let's remind each other of what truly matters, because in the end, we aren't remembered for what we were worth. We are remembered for what we valued.